provide an information delivery session by the MBTA for their plans for an extension to the line from Framingham out to Worcester. A number of sites are possible sites within the town of Ashland to be utilized as stops. We're going to conduct this information meeting as in the following fashion. Before I say anything, I want to point out this is an information meeting. It's not a public hearing. A public hearing is a legal session wherein the Board of Selectmen takes inputs and deliberates, and then all input closes at the end of that kind of a session, and we can't take any more input after that. This is the beginning of a dialogue with the MBTA. They are coming out to talk to us, and my suspicions are that there could be another one or other kinds of sessions, perhaps not as formal as this, but other sessions like this before we get to the end. We're going to conduct the meeting this evening in the following fashion. There'll be a statement of somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. Is that right, Bob?
Yes.
Okay, and that will be by the MBTA. I'll then allow the Board of Selectmen to ask questions of the team. After that, we'll throw it open to the floor for questions. Now, I'm going to try and moderate the questions. I think there's going to be a lot of questions coming up on the floor, and I would ask everybody to be patient and to allow one person after another to ask their questions in turn. Some people may have more than one question, but there are other people who would like to have an opportunity to ask a question as well. So I'm going to try and moderate going through the room, getting everybody's questions out on the table, and at the end, those folks who can't make it in sequence, just queue them all up, and we'll sort of hold back and go to the end. I'm also given to understand that there are a couple of statements that some members of the group that have been formed to follow this citing process would like to make. Rob Shureiner wants to say something, and you also, I believe, want to say something. Is John Renane here? There's a possibility that John Renane may want to make a statement. Okay. You'll certainly be granted that opportunity, Charlie. And that's the way we'll proceed. I think without further ado, I never did ask who was going to be the first person speaking.
I think I'll let Bob.
Okay. Excuse me, Bob, before you go, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah. I'm Charlie Stewart, Assistant Director of Construction at the MBTA.
Can't hear you.
Charlie Stewart. Charlie Stewart, Assistant Director of Construction at the MBTA.
And I'm Bob Joseph from the consulting firm of Edwards and Kelsey. I thought what we would do tonight, rather than a statement, we'll describe what it is the MBTA proposes, what the project is, and then we'll describe in a few minutes what the process is, to bring everybody up to date on where we are, and then turn it back to John for a question and answer period. First of all, the proposed project is to extend commuter rail from Framingham 23 miles to downtown Worcester. Right now, commuter rail service runs from Framingham in with 10 station stops to South Station. In the years ago, or in the mid-70s, there was service from Worcester, and in about 1975, it was abandoned from Worcester to Framingham, and just the Framingham service was retained. In the past several years, there's been substantial growth in commuter rail ridership. There's many new locomotives and many new cars. You've probably seen some of these new double-deck cars the MBTA has. And ridership has expanded tremendously, and it's now one of the fastest growing MBTA services, and it's much in demand on the other lines that the MBTA runs. Some 76,000 people a day take commuter rail from various outlying cities and towns into downtown Boston, into either the north side or North Station or South Station. The service that this line would provide service to basically Back Bay and South Station. Now then, in 1990, or in 1988, a feasibility study was undertaken by the MBTA. This is a copy of the finished document. And the feasibility study examined or answered the question, did it make any sense to extend this along this rail line? And after 2 years of study, they concluded that yes, it was feasible, and there seemed to be tremendous support for the project, especially from the Worcester end. During the course of the study, some intermediate station sites were proposed. They're not cast in concrete, it's not definite. They were more proposed for the idea of figuring out what ridership the line might get. And in this feasibility study, there were 3 intermediate stations. One was proposed in Ashland at House Street. Another was proposed in Westboro, right close to 195 and the Turnpike. And the 3rd intermediate station was proposed in Grafton. Our work, with the successful completion of this study, our firm received a contract to go the next step. And that next step is called schematic design. There's a step after schematic design, and that's called final design. And these are very discrete steps that require to advance a project from initial thinking through to construction. So we're in the initial, very early stages called schematic design, and our job during the next several months is to firm up the location of the intermediate stations, and also to do the engineering studies to figure out how we can operate passenger service, commuter rail passenger service on this existing Conrail freight line. This is a little bit different situation than some of the other commuter rail lines that the MBTA runs. Other lines they have, there is no freight service. So there's no conflict between freight trains and the MBTA trains. This line is an active freight line, as I'm sure most of you know since they come right through your town now at a grade crossing. And it'll take a good bit of signal work and coordination with Conrail to figure out how we can make sure that the trains, Amtrak trains, Conrail trains, and the MBTA trains can all operate on this on the same tracks. We expect that in some cases we'd be double tracking, adding some track that used to be there but been removed over the years. Now, that's, again, you might ask, well, what would the commuter rail service consist of? For those of you who know it, at other areas, other lines, basically the commuter rail service is a train every half hour in the morning peak period, or roughly from 6 to 8. So if you could expect a train coming through here in the morning rush hour, heading toward Boston, once every half an hour. In the what we call the off-peak period, after 8:30 or so, 8:30, the trains only go through once every 2 hours. In the afternoon, from 4 to 6, trains again would be coming out from Boston about on the half hour. And then service, I believe, stops at some sort of reasonable hour.
What? Yeah, they have a late train at 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, and that's the end of it. Then there are not trains all night long. And then the first train would be somewhere around, say, 6 o'clock. Something in that order. So that's what the service consists of. Essentially, it's peak, what we call one-way peak direction. In the morning, there's more trains going into Boston. In the afternoon, there's more trains coming out. Now, the feasibility study concluded that about 2,500 people a day would take this extension. This 23-mile extension would attract an additional 2,300 people going into Boston, and about the same number would come out. So this line would be used by, you can either say 2,500 people or 5,000, depending on whether you want to look at people or trips. What I think I'd like to spend a few minutes now is explain what we've done to firm up the location, or begin our analysis of the location for these intermediate stations. And I guess I'd like to say right at the outset, no final decisions have been made on any of the intermediate station locations. We're here tonight to discuss the range of potential options that we see, and the most important part of the reason we're here is to get your ideas and see what you like or don't like. Before I discuss the potential sites in Ashland, I'd like to discuss some of the other ones, because as you probably could imagine, the intermediate stations have to work together, and again, the feasibility study talked about 2,500 people. The stations can be in different locations, but obviously they couldn't be all in a row in one town. We'd like to have some sort of reasonable spacing. These dots that we show here represent the dots that the intermediate station locations as proposed in the feasibility study. Now, since the feasibility study, we've looked at the line, the opportunities, the constraints that are out there, and I'd like to bring you up to date on what our thinking is. I'm going to start in the middle in Westboro first. We found that the station site that was proposed in Westboro, it's called the Fruit Street site, we found that that would be exceedingly difficult to develop that site for several reasons. The wetlands and the fact that it's what's called an area of critical environmental concern, the lack of access, and the fact that there's a huge Conrail new car distribution facility that would interfere with any kind of passenger station in that area. So the site that was proposed here, we've taken that away. And in the past few months, we've met a couple of times in Westboro. And for the time being, the folks in Westboro, or at least the committee that the selectmen of Westboro formed to look at it, have endorsed a station site located on what's called the Otis Street area, right there. And I'd like to quickly give you a couple of the pros and cons that they saw on that, as well as what we liked about it. You can get to this station site on a fairly substantial road. It's not in the residential area and is very close to Route 9. A station site here would serve Westboro as well as Shrewsbury, some of Northborough, and some other towns. But basically, it doesn't have any neighborhood impact type of issues. It avoids wetlands. There's an available site. There's 6 or 7, 8 acres of land for sale, no buildings on it, and it looks like a pretty good site. And essentially, the committee in Westboro that was formed essentially came to the same conclusions that we did. I might as well do this end of the line before we head east to Ashland. In Grafton, there was a particular site called the Pine Street site. It had some good points and some bad points. We felt the bad points outweighed the good points. And Tufts University essentially came to the rescue and said, well, we have a piece of land we'll reserve for you, not too far away. It's essentially in the same location. But essentially, Tufts University said to us, if you put it here, it would dramatically improve access to our new 1.2